Episode 92. Getting ready to exhibit again? Hear this first.
Welcome to the PR Playbook Podcast, the only podcast giving you actionable skills and advice you need to execute a strategic PR program. Warning: what you hear next may lead to brand awareness and increased sales and customer exposure. Now here's your host, Rinjini Joshua.
Hello and welcome to episode 92. Wow, we're getting close to 100. But before we do, let's talk about getting ready to exhibit again. Now, we're 2022, the pandemic is still running, and we're just finally emerging from our homes to get back to events. And I will say, getting back to events has been a very interesting journey. I went to my first event last October, and it was pretty interesting. People were excited to get out, but also not sure how to act. And so, from the 3 to 4 big events that I've been to so far since we've kind of started emerging from the pandemic, there's been a lot of change and uncertainty. But I definitely picked up on some great tricks along this short path so far. So, I wanted to share this with you in a podcast and give you guys some 6 tips that I've picked up that can have you primed and prepped as you go back to in person events. And actually, you could probably even use them for online virtual events as well if you're attending. But I would say that's a different podcast because there are some things that I would advise on that specifically. So this is really for in person events. Tip number 1: request a list before you head over to the event. Did you know that you can request an attendee list, especially if you're an exhibitor, but also if you're an attendee who's potentially interested in exhibiting or extending your relationship at another point? You can actually get an attendee list. And if you can't get the exact list, you can get the ones from previous years to get an example of the types of people that are showing up, or potentially even the people that might be showing up. And with that list, you can book meetings in advance. Of course, if you are an exhibitor, you should 100% get the attendee list beforehand. And you should also get the pre registered media list, which is basically any media who is pre registered for the show. And that's usually available 3 to 4 weeks in advance. And you want to get that, your hands on that so that you can book meetings, which leads me to my next tip, number 2: book meetings in advance if you can. The best practice that I always preach is to plan ahead as much as possible. However, I did notice that the booths weren't as busy as they typically are in a regular show. And also, if you get to the booth early on day 1, you will have better luck in meeting someone if you did not plan a meeting. And not only meeting someone, but potentially even getting on their calendar if they're not available at that exact moment. So definitely try to book before you head over to the show, meetings, lunches, coffees, whatever. But also don't count yourself out on day 1. Day 1, I would say visit the people that you want to talk to and make sure you get them on your schedule. Number 3: announce news at the show. Now, typically, we sometimes for smaller companies avoid shows, big shows, announcing things on the first, second, third day of big shows because all the big companies are announcing things. But because of the shift, I will tell you specifically at CES, announcing something the second day or the first day of the show was probably the best thing we could have done. As a small company, we got so much attention. We were one of many that did not back out of the press conferences. So there's just a lot of availability, and some of these bigger companies are leaving room for the little guy to shine here. So big companies have bigger protocols around COVID. They aren't allowed to send people, they aren't allowed to make people attend. And so the smaller companies have a lot more to lose by not attending these shows. And so having an announcement at the shows really kind of puts you in front of the media, puts you in front of people that are attending, puts you in front of other exhibitors, potential partners, collaborators. So announce news at the show if you have it. And don't shy away from not announcing news, but trends that are happening, trends that you're seeing, things that you can lead thought leadership on. So announce something at the show. Number 4: go for the big meetings and connect in the app. I put those together because I think that's one misstep that a lot of people make. And something that I noticed over the last few shows is that they do not connect in the app. And I've gotten so much luck with connecting with big fish in the app because it's not as noisy, not as busy, not as much traffic. You can connect with them during the show, before the show, after the show. Make sure you leverage that app. You'd be surprised on who's on there to make the most of their time. Go for the big meetings, go for the big companies. They have maybe a little bit less presence, but a lot more availability because, they're not as expecting as much. So it's just really interesting to see the accessibility that the pandemic has brought for small companies connecting with people that are typically maybe too busy or don't have availability on their calendars. Number 5, take advantage of the happy hours at the show for networking. So, one very kind of sad and interesting fact is that we always know that there's happy hours on the show floor. People usually have them around 4 to 5 o'clock or so, but they are empty. So, take your happy hour game to the next level. The last 2 trade shows I went to were both major and hurting for people to attend their happy hour networking events. So, take advantage of this opportunity to turn on the charm, network, and unwind. And I would say do some happy hour hopping on the show floor and plan that for your last 2 hours on the floor because they are so welcoming. They've paid for these happy hours and these bars and sometimes hors d'oeuvres. So go take advantage of that. But also, take advantage of the networking opportunities and just make sure you bring your cards. I don't know why. It's always the last thing I bring and sometimes the thing I forget to bring. So make sure you bring your cards. If not, you can use your LinkedIn barcode to connect, but definitely take advantage of the show floor happy hours. Last but not least, and always a good reminder, follow up as soon as possible. Attention spans are short and quality connections are few and far between. So if you want them to remember you, follow up and connect as soon as possible. And while it's always okay to reconnect the week, like when you get back to the office, I notice that the sooner that I connect with new people, the more likely I am to remember who they are, what we talked about, and what I want to send them, as well as they are to remember my face and remember our conversation, especially if you've been hitting up those happy hours. My 6 key tips for getting back into the expo game, conference game, trade show game again is number 1, request a list before you head over. So whether attendee list, exhibitor list, media list. Number 2, try to book meetings in advance if you can. Number 3, announce news at the show. This is if you are or if you're not exhibiting, it'll help you get meetings. If you're not exhibiting, try to announce it a little bit earlier so you can kind of engage meetings or engage interest in meetings before the show. If you are attending, I would do the release maybe the first or second day of the show so people can come see your booth. Number 4, go for big meetings and connect in the app. Number 5, take advantage of the show floor happy hours for networking. And last but not least, connect and follow up as soon as possible. I hope this is helpful. I know this was a short pod, but I wanted to just cover this topic before we got too much further into 2022, because I'm noticing a lot of people are now planning their kind of conference routes, and I'm glad to see it happening. But before we get back into full swing, these are some things you definitely want to kind of be mindful of and think of when you're heading to your next conference or event. Good luck, guys. We're always here to answer your burning PR and communications questions. And if you need support at an upcoming trade show, feel free to reach out to me, Ranjini at thesilvertelegram.com. We'll talk to you next time.